Welcome, everyone. I think we're going to get started now. So, start up. My name is Mark Kelly. I'm representing the American Institute of Architects San Francisco Committee on the Environment. I'm co-chair of the Committee on the Environment, and we are one of the organizers for the showcase. This is a 16th annual Water Conservation Showcase, and every year it's arranged around the same time as the World Water Day, which is this year tomorrow, March 22nd. So there's more information about that at worldwaterday.org if you wanted to investigate that, and I'm sure there are probably various activities occurring. I can't name any of them, unfortunately, but I'm sure there's plenty. So I wanted to introduce the co-organizers, which include the USGBC, the United States Green Building Council, and the USGBC is the nation's foremost coalition of leaders from across the building industry, working to promote buildings that are environmentally responsible, profitable, and healthy places to live and work. And I'm sure most of us are very familiar with the USGBC's work. Thank you to them. East Bay Municipal Utility District, who supplies water and provides wastewater treatment to parts of Alameda and Contra Costa counties. San Francisco Public Utilities Commission, which is a department of the city and county of San Francisco and provides retail drinking water and wastewater services to San Francisco, as well as wholesale water to 3 Bay Area counties, as well as many other things. In the interest of time, I won't go into all of the detail. We mentioned the AIA Committee on the Environment, also the City of San Jose's Water Resources Division, and similarly, they provide drinking water service to 12% of San Jose and have developed water use rules for residents and businesses and provide a list of water-saving tips at their website, which is sanjoseca.gov/water efficiency, all one word, as well as the Pacific Energy Center, sponsored by PG&E, and who's hosting this in the entire event. So special thanks to them. There's a few housekeeping things. I want to, thank all the showcase sponsors who are listed here on the slide. Also want to let everyone know that the presentation materials will be available after the showcase. Not immediately. It takes a little bit of time for everything to be processed and posted to the website, but they will be posted to the waterconservationshowcase.com website in April at some point, as soon as everyone can pull the slides together and get them organized and get them uploaded. So there will also be evaluations of the presentations using SurveyMonkey. And again, this is in the interest of less paper. A small factoid, it's almost 5 gallons of water is required for each pound of paper manufactured. So we're trying to go with as little paper as possible, with the exception of myself. I apologize. I'm old school that way. So for those of you who are looking for continuing education credits or learning units, they're both available through the USGBC, which is self-reporting, and anyone who is doing that probably should know the process, hopefully. And the course number here is listed on the slide that's up at the moment. And for the AIA credits, you need to sign the paper here. And if anybody needs this, we'll circulate it around. And if you need to sign it, you have to sign this paper in order to get the credits, though, because we'll report that. So I'll just have that passed around to anyone who's interested and needs that. Sorry, more logistics. Fire exits, I think we know go back out the way we came in and then go out to the front of the building, or the second exit is just here, the double doors that are just over here to the right-hand side of the room. The convening location in case of a major emergency for all of us would be at the Carousel, which is at Yerba Buena Gardens. I think by this point, hopefully everyone's aware of where that is. It's out the front door and down the block to the right. And then lastly, for the purely functional things, please silence your phones. I won't go on about that because we all have heard that so many times. So moving into the introductions, sorry. So we have Taylor Chang from the a water resources analyst from San Francisco PUC, Sarah Triolo from water resources project manager from San Francisco PUC, Don Berger, who's a consultant with West Yost, Amelia Luna, a project manager with Sherwood Design Engineers, and Deborah Rich, director of business development with Conso Water, formerly known as Aqualogic. So briefly, I will read a little bit about each of them. So Taylor is a water resources analyst at SFPUC, and she manages the non-potable water programs and provides technical assistance to developers, designers, and engineers implementing on-site non-potable water systems. Sarah Triolo is recently joined SFPUC's Water Resources Division, having previously worked for more than 4 years as an environmental engineering consultant. In her current role, Sarah is focused on diversifying San Francisco's water supply through the use of innovative water reuse projects, and she's worked on numerous potable and non-potable reuse projects throughout the state of California. Don is a water reuse consultant with West Yost Associates, a consulting engineering firm focused exclusively on water. Don is a registered civil engineer in California with over 28 years of experience managing the planning, design, and construction of complex and multifaceted projects related to water recycling and water treatment. Amelia is a professional engineer with 9 years of civil and environmental engineering experience, and she is a project manager with Sherwood Design Engineers, and as such, she spearheads the water reuse projects, including wastewater treatment, net zero water systems, and water quality improvements on urban planning developments and campuses. Deborah has joined Conso in 2018 to expand its national business presence and to manage the strategic growth of the company. She was an early player in the solar industry and brings a deep understanding of environmental business models and go-to market strategies. So without further ado, Taylor, I think that you're mic'd. And welcome to all the, I think I've been turned off. Welcome to the speakers. Thank you.
Thanks. Oh, that's bright. Okay. Hi, I'm Taylor. I work for the San Francisco Public Utilities Commission in our Water Resources Division. And I'm here to talk about our non-potable water program. The San Francisco Public Utilities Commission is a municipal agency within the city and county of San Francisco, and we provide water, power, and sewer services for our area. We have adopted a One Water San Francisco approach to our resource management, and what that really means is moving away from a traditional water in, wastewater out model, really looking towards a more holistic approach to our resource management, and that involves strategies like on-site water reuse. On-site water reuse is fundamentally in line with our One Water SF philosophy because it's really about matching the right resource to the right use. In San Francisco, we are focused primarily on our local water program in the Water Resources Division. And what that really involves is 4 key program areas: water conservation, developing new groundwater supplies, recycled water supplies on a centralized scale, as well as decentralized non-potable water systems. And I'm going to focus on this last program area today. Decentralized reuse is really a way that the utility is looking at expanding our water supply portfolio, recognizing that buildings produce water. So buildings, you can imagine there's a lot of different water sources that buildings can produce. For example, rainwater, which is, just as a refresher, precipitation collected from roofs, stormwater, which is precipitation collected at grade, Foundation drainage, which is really that nuisance groundwater that gets pumped out to sewers with sump pumps. Gray water, which is wastewater collected from your clothes washers, your bathroom sinks, and your showers. And then black water, which is really all of your building's wastewater. On-site reuse is happening all throughout the world. It's not a new technology. I'm going to go through some examples. For example, Haslow on 8th is a district-scale wastewater reuse project happening in Portland, Oregon. They are harvesting wastewater from 4 urban city blocks, treating that and reusing that for toilet flushing, cooling, and irrigation within that whole downtown area. The Water Hub is another example of a wastewater reuse project happening in Atlanta at Emory University. They are capturing and treating that wastewater for cooling purposes as well as future residential buildings toilet flushing. And they're achieving a 40% reduction in potable water use with that system. So as I mentioned, there's interest from both the utility side in terms of developing new local water supplies to make our supply and portfolio more resilient. But there's also been interest from the private sector as well that's interested in doing innovative and sustainable things to get LEED credit to meet their own sustainability goals. The PUC headquarters building has an on-site blackwater treatment system where we're using an engineered wetland to treat all of our buildings' wastewater, reusing that for toilet and urinal flushing in our building. And we've been able to get to offset 60% of our water consumption with that system. And then on the private sector side, an example is the St. Anthony's Affordable Housing Building, where they are capturing rainwater from their roofs and treating it and reusing it for toilet flushing. In San Francisco, we are leading the way with our non-potable water program, which really was established in 2012 through an ordinance that was added to our health code. And what that ordinance did really was highlight the roles and responsibilities of the 4 city agencies that are involved in administering our program. So I can go into a little bit of detail about who those players are. The San Francisco PUC we are involved with program administration, so that's really tracking projects and helping administer the program, as well as another division within our organization manages our cross-connection control program. San Francisco Department of Public Health Environmental Health Branch is the key permitting agency in our program, so they're really important stakeholder. They do detailed engineering report reviews of every single project that's being proposed. They issue water quality requirements, as well as permits to operate each and every system. Department of Building Inspection is also involved in terms of plumbing plan reviews of every project, as well as overseeing the general construction of the project. And then Public Works gets involved in these district scale applications where one or more buildings are sharing water across the street and installing infrastructure and pipelines in the public right of way. So anytime a project is proposing that, they have to go work with Public Works to get an encroachment permit to do that. We offer a whole host of technical and financial assistance to projects, designers and developers. Just a couple of things I wanted to highlight. Our non-potable program Guidebook, there's a couple copies up here, so feel free to take those on your way out. But that really highlights our 8-step permitting process that we've established and makes it in a user-friendly and easy-to-read way on how to comply with our requirements. Our Non-Potable Calculator, which is this Excel-based tool that helps projects understand what their water demands are on site for toilet flushing, other non-potable uses like irrigation, cooling, that kind of thing, and also determining how much volume you can get from supplies like gray water, rainwater, and black water. And then our financial assistance, we have a grant program, our non-potable grant program, which offers grants for projects that are installing these on-site treatment systems and want some financial assistance to get that project going. And we offer $100,000 grants, $250,000 grants, and $500,000 grants, depending on how much potable water your project is proposing to offset. Our program has evolved over time. So as I mentioned, it was established in 2012, and it allowed individual buildings to capture water on site, treat it, and then reuse it for non-potable applications. In 2013, the ordinance was amended to allow for district scale reuse, and that's again sharing water across one or more parcels for non-potable applications. And then in 2015, at the height of the drought, our supervisor at the time decided to make this ordinance a mandatory requirement for new developments over 250,000 square feet. So any new large development that meets that threshold has to install and operate an on-site treatment system to meet their demands for toilet flushing and irrigation. Some examples of projects happening here in San Francisco. 181 Fremont is just commissioning their system, and they are doing gray water and rainwater reuse for toilet flushing and irrigation. Salesforce Tower, many of you know, it's the tallest building west of the Mississippi, is proposing to install a black water treatment system for toilet flushing, cooling, and irrigation. The Chase Center is a mandatory project that's falling under that 2015 ordinance requirement. It's an arena for the Warriors basketball team that's being built in San Francisco's Mission Bay neighborhood, as well as 2 accompanying office towers. And that project is capturing rainwater, stormwater, gray water, and condensate from those 3 buildings, treating it in one system, and then reusing it for toilet flushing and irrigation in the arena as well as the office buildings. Moscone Convention Center, they recently went through an expansion of their facility, and with that expansion, they installed a reuse system to reuse foundation drainage that's currently millions and millions of gallons of water being pumped to the sewer, so they decided they wanted to capture that. Foundation drainage, treat it and reuse it for toilet flushing within the convention center, irrigation, and a street sweeping truck fill station to allow DPW trucks to come and fill up their trucks and then clean the streets of San Francisco. We have spent a lot of time in San Francisco addressing challenges and barriers around on-site water reuse, particularly around water quality and governance issues. Just on the governance issues, we have collaborated on a national level through the National Blue Ribbon Commission for On-Site Reuse, and that involves several different stakeholders throughout the country, water and wastewater utilities, as well as public health agencies, all coming together to address how do we come up with a consistent way to permit and oversee these types of systems that's protective of public health. Some of the efforts that came out of that include this blueprint for on-site water systems, which is a guidebook that goes through the 10 high-level steps you need to take to set up an on-site reuse program in your community. On the water quality front, we've done a significant amount of research to really address what are the appropriate water quality standards that these systems should be meeting. I won't go into too much detail because Sarah's going to get into it in her presentation. But what came out of that research effort was this report. It's called the WRF report, and it established a risk-based water quality approach, and it's really looking at reducing exposure to pathogens like virus, protozoa, and bacteria. It's achieving water quality that's fit for non-potable uses, and the framework really emphasizes treatment processes and continuous online monitoring in real time. Some of the more recent efforts that the National Collaborative has focused on is this model regulations document, which really, again, puts the tools in place for communities to develop consistent permitting and management approaches for on-site reuse. I highly encourage you to check out this document. As a result of the work that we've been doing, many jurisdictions throughout the country have been able to move forward with this risk-based water quality approach, which is really exciting. In San Francisco, we amended our program in 2017 to update our water quality requirements to be aligned with these risk-based standards. In California, we sponsored Senate Bill 966, which directed the state board to develop risk-based standards on a statewide level for California for on-site reuse. And that passed into law last year. Colorado amended their Regulation 84, which is allowing decentralized black water treatment systems in Colorado. Minnesota has published guidelines, and Washington, Oregon, and Hawaii have recently introduced legislation similarly modeled on SB 966, and Texas and Alaska are a few other states that are following suit. So it's really exciting. And then I will just end with this slide that some of the future work that we are pursuing is this guidance manual for engineers, operators, utilities, and regulators. And what that manual will do is really identify the skills and knowledge required to design and permit systems under this new risk-based water quality framework. And it's estimated completed mid-2019. So with that, I'll hand it over to Sarah.
All right, thanks, Taylor. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about what we're doing in San Francisco with water quality and treatment for on-site reuse systems. So as Taylor mentioned, in 2017, we updated, San Francisco Department of Public Health updated the rules and regulations to incorporate these new risk-based pathogen log reduction targets. Our primary focus of doing on-site reuse is to protect public health. We really want to make sure that's a priority. And so this framework emphasizes continuous online monitoring, making sure our treatment barriers are working, and also looking at our treated water quality. So what are these mysterious log reduction targets? So we want to protect people who are exposed to this non-potable water. And so when we use the water for uses like toilet flushing and irrigation, there is an exposure from people to this water, and we want to make sure that it's safe. So we're targeting a certain water quality to be used when we flush our toilets and do irrigation. And we have all of these different potential alternate source waters like black water, gray water, and rainwater, and these all have different water qualities. So we know where we need to get to at the end there when we're flushing our toilets, and we understand where we're starting, and it depends on what kind of water we're looking at. And so the log reduction target is all about getting us from where we're starting to the safe place that we want to be. And the goal of these log reduction targets is really to match each specific source water with the appropriate end use and create a water that is fit for purpose. So our LRTs are generating non-potable water. I just want to be clear that this is not, the goal is not to create potable quality water. This is fit for purpose water for toilet flushing, irrigation, cooling, and these other non-potable applications. So we really care about pathogens. That's super important. This is our main public health risk. But there's other things we need to think about when we're talking about picking treatment for these systems and making sure that the water quality is appropriate for the end uses. So I've talked about the pathogens. So the other kind of main categories are these organics and solids. And what is that? That's all of the crud that's in this water. So that's our poop. I have my pin. Thanks, Kyle. That's all of the, detergents or shampoo or all the stuff that's coming into all these different waters. And this can present a couple different challenges. So having all this stuff in the water can make it hard for our treatment processes to be effective. And it can also be challenging to make this water aesthetically pleasing, which is really important for public acceptance of this water. And so when we're talking about organics, these are compounds that are in the water. They can impact our disinfection processes. So when we chlorinate our water or when we use UV light, if we have too much stuff in the water, it can really impact the effectiveness of those and impact our ability to remove pathogens. And also, if we end up with a bunch of organics in our water going out, that's basically food for bacteria that can grow in our pipes, that can end up creating, this kind of colored, smelly water that we really want to avoid. And same with solids. These can also impact our ability to do disinfection effectively, and we also don't want this water to be cloudy and turbid when it goes in our toilets. And so this is just to kind of, give a rule of thumb of what we're expecting to see with these different source waters. I really want to emphasize that the water quality of these can vary really significantly based on site-specific conditions. And so if you're somebody designing a treatment system, it's really important to consider your specific type of building, commercial versus residential, the type of fixtures that are there. You know, in San Francisco, all these new buildings have low-flow fixtures that can impact how concentrated these waters are. But obviously, in general, we would expect that black water is going to have the most crud in it. And we're seeing that gray water can also have, because of things like low flow fixtures, can have pretty high organics concentrations as well. And then moving down, we're obviously going to expect to not see a whole ton in rainwater that's being collected from a roof. And so once we kind of understand the water quality of these different source waters, it's important to identify the appropriate treatment so that we can meet our pathogen log reductions and meet our water quality standards. And so depending on the type of water you're treating, you might need different types of treatment. So just some things to consider, if you do have black water or gray water with really high organics, probably biological treatment in some form is going to be the best way to do that, whether that's a membrane bioreactor or whether that's the engineered wetland type of system that we have in our own headquarters. And then filtration is going to be the most effective way to remove solids. And again, there's so many different types of technology that I won't go into, but it's important to identify, what's in your source water and where you're trying to get to in order to pick an appropriate technology. And then finally, disinfection will be our final barrier against these pathogens that we're trying to remove. So I just want to give a couple examples of some treatment trains. So the top one is an example black water treatment train. This is not the only possible train. This is purely to illustrate an example. But this is showing the use of a membrane bioreactor, which combines biological treatment and filtration into one process. This can be a really effective way to get a lot of treatment done in a pretty small footprint. And then followed by some UV and free chlorine disinfection. And my little boxes here are just illustrating the importance of using online monitoring to verify that all of our treatment barriers are working as we want them to be working. And then in contrast, the rainwater system that I'm showing on the bottom can be a little bit simpler because as we saw, we don't have as many pathogens, solids, or organics in there. So you can use a kind of a simpler type of filter followed by some free chlorine disinfection. So again, we're really trying to provide the right amount of treatment for a particular source water. And I'm going to just talk about a couple of kind of lessons learned that we're learning as we implement this program and some kind of new things we're thinking about moving forward. So just some things we're seeing for treatment design of these alternate water source systems. With black water, as I mentioned, color can be a really important consideration for treatment. If somebody goes into a bathroom stall and they see yellow water, they may flush the toilet before using it, which is kind of defeating the whole purpose of conservation in the first place. So there are technologies that can be used to address that issue. Free chlorine, ozone, these oxidants can be used to reduce the color of this water. As I mentioned, gray water, we are seeing that in San Francisco with all of our low flow fixtures, we can end up with pretty high concentrations of organics in gray water. And so we may need to be seeing biological treatment being used in these gray water treatment systems. And with rainwater, I just want to highlight the importance of, if doing rainwater harvesting, consider how you can maximize the benefits of both non-potable reuse and also stormwater management benefits when designing rainwater harvesting systems. And I'll just give a plug for our, we have a document up here. It's the synergies between our non-potable ordinance and our stormwater management ordinance if people are interested in learning more about how those two things kind of work together. And so as we move forward, we're really focused on, as these systems come online, getting more data, getting better data, improving our technical assistance that we're providing to projects, learning more about, how much water our building's generating and what are the patterns of how they're using water, things that can kind of help us all move forward and improve the design of these systems. We're also working toward an operator certificate program to make sure that operators have sufficient capacity to keep these systems working effectively. And we're supporting additional innovative efforts in San Francisco. So things like breweries who want to reuse their process water on site, and also things like atmospheric water generation, integrating heat exchangers into on-site reuse so we can improve energy efficiency. And also we do have a potable reuse pilot going on in our building. If you want to learn more, we're happy to talk more about that. So implementing a first of its kind non-potable program takes time. It takes many dedicated stakeholders. It's an ongoing effort. And so we are always continuing our research and planning efforts. We're looking forward to gathering new data, improving our technical assistance, and kind of moving this industry forward. Thank you.
Okay, all right, give me a moment. I'm going to transition slides here. Okay, check, check. Okay, so where's Taylor? Where's my exit? Thank you, I appreciate that. So just close this. So here, this one. Gotcha, okay. Okay, how's that? Can you hear me okay? Well, good afternoon. I'm Don Berger with West Yost Associates. It's a pleasure to be here with you today to share some of the things that we've learned in our work in this growing field of on-site reuse. And you've heard today about San Francisco's very successful and established program. It's in fact provided it's been a model for others around the country to develop their programs, and it's provided a model regulatory framework. But what if you're working outside of San Francisco? What if you want to propose a system in Silicon Valley, for example? What I want to share with you today is you're likely to encounter a different permitting pathway. San Francisco is unique, and all the agencies here are share the same boundaries: the water, wastewater, the building department, the health department. And so that's nice because it basically provides one-stop shopping for your permit if you're wanting to propose one of these. But outside of San Francisco, we typically are seeing multiple independent agencies and stakeholders that have interest and oversight in this. It's typically separate public agencies. And the other issue is that in San Francisco, you heard there's a number of these systems that are already built and are in the works. But outside of San Francisco, there's not a lot of example projects to draw on. So if you're proposing a project, you may be the first one in the door to the public agency. And up until SB 966 was passed, as Taylor mentioned, this just last September, there's really been a lack of state regulations on how to go about this. And this is a summary. It was the first of its kind in the nation, on-site reuse legislation, and there's a few years on this before it's fully implemented, but by December 2022, we expect to have statewide regulations on public health-based standards for these systems, and by 2023, building standards. And as Senator Wiener pointed out, what this is going to do is it's going to give cities the tools that they need to really advance water recycling in the on-site reuse area. And I want to put this up that summarize kind of what I was saying, is that if you're in San Francisco, the permit process flows very smoothly, easily. And not to say that it doesn't flow smoothly outside of San Francisco, but you have a few more agencies that might be involved. In fact, this illustrates what you might find if you're proposing a project elsewhere: rainbow of permitting options. And at the very top of that is the Regional Water Quality Control Board. And here in California, the Regional Water Quality Control Boards and the Department of Drinking Water are responsible for promulgating and making sure that Title 22, which is the state water recycling regulations are adhered to. And here in San Francisco, because they already have a permitting program which has been developed and approved by the state, they have permission to issue the permits on their own. But elsewhere, at least until SB 966 is fully implemented and cities adopt those regulations, then for the next 3 or 4 years, the regional board and DDW will be involved in permitting a system if you want to implement it. And on the on the left there of sewer, these systems, by the way, they as we were talking about, they produce water to reuse on the site, but they also produce a waste stream from these membrane bioreactors, and that has to go somewhere. It typically goes to the public sewer, and in that case, the sewer district and possibly the municipal wastewater treatment plant is going to want to review that discharge and make sure that that works out with their operations. And then going around to the right there, we're very likely to see separate health and building departments, and the county health departments are often involving with the cross-connection tests, so you need to coordinate with them. And the air district, or there could be a separate water entity that's involved in these. So it doesn't mean that the process is, it's just there's more people that you need to coordinate with up front, and it can still go very smoothly for you, and just as long as you're aware of all the permitting agencies that may be involved. So the big lesson learned from this, the big takeaway is before you go and design a system, find out who the permit stakeholders are, who has an interest in this, and meet with them early to find out what their requirements are to avoid surprises. Because if they're surprised, you may be surprised that you need to make some changes or your project may be delayed. And I put these up here. These are not all the things that you might find, but I put these up here because these are some ones that I want to draw your attention to. And as I mentioned, the waste, the first several involve the waste discharge from these systems. I think Sarah talked about water clarity and needing to remove organics. And these systems are very site specific. Some of them, it may make sense to put in a reverse osmosis treatment system, and if you have that's going in, you have a brine that's typically generated, and you might think, well, the salts end up getting concentrated, and that would likely go to the sewer system. So you might think, well, that's already there. It's just more concentrated. But if the agency that you're discharging to, the sewer agency, already has a municipal wastewater program, recycled water program, where they have high salt concentrations, you may need to look at other options for disposing your brine or going with a different process, possibly like an ozone process. And then also, one of the issues that we're seeing in California, and I think nationwide, is a decline in wastewater flows in the sewer system. We've been doing such a good job with water conservation, with all the water conserving fixtures. There's less wastewater that's flowing out there. So that means that the public agencies have had to spend more money cleaning their sewers to keep the solids from depositing in there. So that means that depending on where you're wanting to discharge your waste, that could impact their system. It could result in additional cleaning, and you may end up having to introduce some flush water into the sewer to keep it moving. One area, screenings materials. What I mean by that is the things like rags, wipes, and things that might be flushed into the building system, and your system is going to take those out because it could plug up your treatment process. But those have to go somewhere. They get concentrated, and so putting those concentrated screenings back in the sewer can also generate an issue. And so you want to know up front if you're going to have to take those off-site, and there's equipment that can bag it up. In fact, what's interesting is there's people now that are looking at reusing the screenings materials to produce energy, which could be a win for you. But if you don't know that up front and you've designed your system to return the screenings to the sewer, and you have to make a change, that could delay your project. And lastly, I wanted to point out the long-term ownership and operation and because because these systems are operated typically by private entities, when you come in for a permit, the agencies are going to say, how do we know you're going to be around to maintain this? How do we know that you have the operators that are going to make sure that this is running correctly? And San Francisco, as was mentioned, has standards for operator certification, and as part of the Blue Ribbon, I know there's a report that's being developed But that's something that you want to have lined up when you go in, and make sure that you can present that your project is going to meet those requirements. So just lastly, I just want to share with you a couple of examples outside of San Francisco of projects that are going in that took a different permitting pathway. And one of them is Facebook system there by the Dumbarton Bridge at their headquarters in Menlo Park. It's in permitting now and hopes to be operating later this year. It's a membrane bioreactor. It will treat about 90,000 gallons of wastewater from several buildings there at their campus for toilet and urinal flushing. And it uses a membrane bioreactor and reverse osmosis. And this particular system, as I noted, was provided by Aquacell, which is one of the ones that they do a lot of systems. The other one is Microsoft, a little further south in Mountain View, is expanding their campus. They're in the process of permitting and will be, I think, constructing that and hopefully operating next year. It's going to be net zero for non-potable water, so the only potable water that's used will be the drinking fountains and sinks in the building. It's going to reuse all the wastewater on site, about 4 million gallons a year of water, and we'll also incorporate some rainwater into that project. And I also wanted to just acknowledge Natural Systems Utilities and also Sherwood Engineering and WRNS Studio, who were project proponents and partners in that project. And just lastly, I want to just say a number of us just returned from the State Water Reuse Association Conference, which was held in Los Angeles this year. And a few years ago, we might have seen just one or two papers on on-site reuse. This last year, there was 2 complete sessions on on-site reuse. So that shows you the growing interest in this topic. And by the way, the conference, those of you who are interested in learning more about trends in water reuse, the conference is next March, will be here in San Francisco. So I encourage all of you to attend and check it out. With that. Oh, you got it? Yeah, perfect.
Am I open here? All right. Okay. Hi, everyone. So as we peel back the layers of the on-site reuse onion, I will dig a little bit deeper into what it really means to take on the responsibility of developing one of these systems, and what are some of the models at your fingertips. And some of this is really from the kind of owner perspective, developer perspective. We do a lot of work on that part of the industry. And then I'd like to highlight some of the benefits. So I apologize, these slides are a little bit wordy, so I'll move fast through them. And if there's time at the end, I'll go through some of the projects that we've been working on recently. I've got a few slides on that, including the Microsoft Silicon Valley campus that Don mentioned. Really quickly, Sherwood Design Engineers focuses on the intersection of ecology, creativity, and engineering, and work in a very interdisciplinary fashion in that way. We are a full site civil engineering firm. So just to start the conversation, why are we doing this? What is the rationale? I think that Taylor and Sarah did a great job of walking you through why City of San Francisco has taken on such initiative in this world of on-site reuse. So understanding why either outside of San Francisco or if not required, why you might take on an on-site reuse project. Who are the project stakeholders? I think that that was really covered, so I'm not going to go into that much here, but looking at everybody from the design engineer to the utility to the regulator and the operations side. What project at what scale? I'll get into that a little bit in this presentation. Financial feasibility I'll also touch on, very site specific, so there's no one solution there for how you might look at the finances for one of these systems.
and future readiness and phasing. So I'll talk about that when we talk about benefits. So those are some of the questions I often get. But I promised I would talk a little about ownership. So some of the terminology for those that aren't in the industry doing this every day, there's design, build, design, bid, build, and design, build, own, finance. So I've sort of, some of the terminology there I've used in this circle on the right. So we might think of the kind of ownership models as what type of risk would you take on as an owner. So if you wanted to do design, bid, build, that typically means as an owner, you're taking on all of the risk of developing the project, cost escalations, successful delivery, successful operations, right? That really comes on to the owner or developer. As you move it around the circle and clockwise, DB, design, build, means there's some shared risk, right? So the person who's going to build this system is also going to, okay, thanks, is also going to share some of that risk for you. The, we're good? Okay. Sorry, it changed in my view. So then design, build, operate. So the systems need to be successful for the long term. And so who's going to operate those systems? If you engage the person who's building your system to also operate your system, there's more shared risk in that approach. So we call that DBO, or design, build, operate. And then there's DBFO, which really transfers most, if not all, of the risk to I'm calling a water provider partner. And so a DBFO means that the person who's providing your on-site non-potable water system is also financing that system. Typically done at larger scales, but again, every project is unique. And when we talk about ownership of a specific development, there are, I like to think about sort of three camps, or maybe we'll start with two and then I'll explain the third. So owner, builder, and go to sort of I think we're going to keep going here. How do you pay for this investment, right? So that's kind of from a private perspective. This all seems fine and good, but it seems like it takes a lot of money. So I think first we want to understand that we're in a changing infrastructure environment, right? We're in a world where there's not as much investment coming in from the federal side as there may have been in when this infrastructure was first built. So making sure you're assessing the true costs of the project if you weren't going to build such a system. And assess life cycle costs and determine any first cost offsets. So if you build this system, might you not have to build something else? I mentioned some of the less tangible benefits. So keeping in mind that water infrastructure is also not optional. So it's not sort of, should I invest in it or should I not? You're going to invest in it, and so we just need to do it in a smart way. But sometimes we are starting to see that there are simple paybacks that you can do. There may be an opportunity to demonstrate a real business case for implementing some of these systems. So if new investments are required, what's the type of investment, and how can I gain confidence early on in my project that this is the right investment? So focusing on those questions really early on in your project will make sure that it's successful, that you've sort of chosen the right project at the end of the day. So you can insulate yourself from these rising rates of water and sewer. You can potentially reduce some of your connection fees. I just give the example in San Francisco, you do get a credit for your water meter connection based on your non-potable system. So there's crediting systems like that. Also ways for utilities to gain some income back if the people are buying less water, right? More water conservation means there's fewer folks buying that water. So shifting from a volume rate to more of a fixed rate and finding other revenue streams for utilities, making sure it works for both parties. I mentioned the return on investment and other benefits. Maybe if you build a system like this, you are actually enabling yourself to do something more creative with a site that you wouldn't otherwise have been able to do. But at the end of the day, Dawn touched on the permitting process, and I just wanted to highlight this, and during Q&A we can get into it if there's time. But one of the most important things that some of the structures that PUC and others nationwide are setting up is that they're demystifying the process for developers so that you can have some assurance that you're going to, like I mentioned, build the right project, but also know that you're going to have the sort of regulatory framework and bodies that you need to get that project approved in time for your project, and that you're going to have the sort of water that your project needs to move forward. So there's changing market demands in our water infrastructure, and the way that we think about typical investments is shifting. So how are we as a market going to adapt to this changing thinking and how we invest in water infrastructure? We think that on-site non-potable water systems can be a transformative opportunity in how the urban centers of the future address water supply, but there's a risk that those benefits might not be realized if we don't sort of consider all of these pieces of the puzzle, or layers of the onion, as it were. So a one-size-fits-all approach will not work. So with that, I will pass it on to Deb to bring us home.
3 minutes. Oh, hello. Oh, wow. Now you can really hear me. Okay. I'm going to be really frank with you today. I am going to win an award for this slides. Down, which is such a bummer because I've got like 3 minutes. But, and the other thing is, if you notice when it says presented, it says an overview of alternative procurement methods for in-building or district scale water recycling projects. It has my name, Deborah Rich, Director of Business Development, but it also has Peter Haas, CTO, who's in Rwanda. speccing out for Diane Foss on-site wastewater treatment system for her Gorilla complex. So I am doing it in his place, and he left me with some really not, beautiful slides, but it's still a great topic, and I'm excited about it. So just really quickly, we're going to talk about traditional design and build method. And I'm just going to really look at it real fast, and it's just to give you a perspective of, like, what are we typically doing when we go in and design and build? Who's at risk, right? Then we're going to look at what we call the design, or what Peter and I call the design transfer and build method. Again, really fast. Then we're going to look at the DeBoom. The DeBoom is my favorite, and you guys will hear why. And then I'm barely going to touch on P3 because you already went over it. In fact, you and I should have probably coordinated a teeny bit, but that's okay. All right, so traditional design and build, right? Traditional design and build is a client will hire an engineer, and they will design and engineer out of on-site wastewater or water treatment, right? So you really are getting down into the nitty-gritty. You've got your engineering all figured out, and then you go into the tender process and you hire a contractor to come in and to go on build everything that you've planned out. The thing of this is it takes a long time. You got the engineering, they're doing all the engineering, they're doing all the iterations of the engineering, and then they go in to bid for the contractor, and then the contractor comes in. It's very sequential, right? But, it's very safe. You usually know the construction costs, and really it's the client and engineer who are assuming the risk. So keep that in mind. It is the client and the engineer who are assuming the risk. If we don't have the efficacy, if the system's not working correctly, if we're not producing the quality of water that we say we're going to produce, they're held responsible. So it's really important. The last thing to note on this is that they usually pay for the project, right? It's a capital outlay. Okay. Now we go to design, transfer, build. Pretty similar, except that this time the client works with an engineer on a conceptual idea. So this happened with Google. They worked with an engineer. They said, look, we want to have an on-site rainwater capture. We want to do a black water system. We want to have this and this. They came up with this great idea. And then what they did is they went into a competitive bid process looking for a contractor. A contractor looks at their concept, right? Kind of rough a little bit. Looks at the concept, bids on it, and then it goes over to the contractor. The contractor becomes pretty responsible, okay? In fact, the contractor's working directly with Google on this. What's interesting about this is a lot of time construction and design can kind of happen at the same time. You can start to put in pipes while you're starting to tweak the end, right? So that's something to keep in mind. In this one, again, the client pays for the project as a capital outlay. The client's responsible for the O&M, contractor and client. So how's that different? What did I say before? The engineer and client, right? Okay, so keep that in mind. So if something goes wrong, who's at fault? Contractor. Okay, this is my favorite. DeBoom. I love saying it like that. Design, build, own, operate, and maintain. Now this is really interesting. I come from the solar industry, and when we began to have power purchase agreements, when we began to be able to lease systems to commercial buildings, all of the sudden we saw a huge difference. We saw adoption. And I really believe that with SB 966, all the work that Paul has done, that if we can partner this with DeBoom, it could be a really big thing. Because what it is you have the contractor who actually owns the system. So they deal with the engineering of it, they deal with the design, the permitting, the installation, the ongoing, often very rigorous O&M, like we have to report our water quality results. I mean, it is a long-term thing. So now the client steps out of the risk completely. And what happens is the cost of the system, the cost of the ongoing service and maintenance, all of that is rolled into a fixed monthly payment. So now say you have a multi-tenant housing, you now can divide up that cost and pass that on for the cost of recycled water. It's usually a long-term contract, like 10, 15, 20 years, and then it'll go back to the original owner. This is going to be a deal breaker. I'm really, really, really excited about this. So that's, and I can pretty much end here, to be honest with you, because we went through P3, which is another thing that's pretty exciting, right? We're looking at the P3 partnership. I think that's a huge thing right now in the city of Santa Cruz. We're pretty much, maxed out on our wastewater system. Where our purple pipe goes is pretty much fixed. Our infrastructure, we don't have enough money to build it. But we have developers that want to put in resorts, and they're like, hey, we'll partner with you. We'll pay for this. We'll put in the infrastructure. We'll put in that purple pipe. And then after a period of time, we'll give this back to you. Of course, we're going to make money, but it's a good way to get in to build that infrastructure. So anyways, I'm pretty excited. I think these are deal breakers, and hopefully I was fast. Thanks.
Thank you very much. That was fantastic, and especially kudos to you for getting through all of that in almost 3 minutes. So I think we would like to take questions now, and I think for the panel, I think if you can pass these mics back and forth for those of you who aren't still mic'd. But first off, thank you. Excellent. Yeah, perfect. So sorry, are we okay there? Any questions? Okay.
This is for SFPUC. In 2011-ish, I attended a SPUR event and heard from the city's water engineering consultant that the city was trying to reduce its imported water by 40%. Is that the driver for all of this activity? Because I haven't heard that number since then. And I'm wondering if SFPUC will be promoting this approach to its water wholesalers.
Hi, can you hear me? No. Can you hear me? Okay. I kind of forget what the first part of the question was, but I think.
Is there a particular water reduction, imported water reduction goal number?
I don't think we're looking at it from a goal number. I think this is just one of our strategies to diversify our water supply. So, as you mentioned, 80% of our water comes from Hetch Hetchy in Yosemite Valley, and the other 15% of that comes from our local Bay Area watersheds and a small portion from groundwater. So I think it's really trying to build up that local supply more, and on-site reuse is one of the ways to do that.
Oh, there we are.
Thanks. I'm wondering, for a kind of a smaller community, there's a certain amount of infrastructure that the city has invested for our wastewater recovery facility to generate recycled water. And so if a campus or, a big business ends up treating their own wastewater on site and getting their own recycled water, is there a risk to the investment that the local community has made? So, one, is it all good wherever it comes from? Is there a tipping point on size that a local community shouldn't bother should in fact discourage that type of on-site, at a large scale treatment, or is there some other approach for a smaller community?
Sure, I'll take this one. Thanks for the question, and I think it's important that I tried to emphasize in my presentation sort of looking at both the utility side and the private development side, and so understanding what that shared vision is, right? Is there a specific problem that needs to be solved at the municipal scale, whether it's upgrading conveyance lines or fixing a troublesome pump station, things like that the city is going to need to invest in, or the utility is going to need to invest in any case, and identifying opportunities for on-site reuse that might solve, kill two birds with one stone, let's say, right? Provide a water source and solve an infrastructure problem. So I think it's the answer is it depends, and of course this is part of the changing sort of nature of water infrastructure as we look at developments like potable reuse and and things of that nature, that's one sort of tool in the toolbox, and on-site reuse is another tool in the toolbox that may be appropriate in some situations and may not be appropriate in other situations. I do encourage the utility side to also look at the changing market drivers. So there may actually be financial market drivers on the private side for implementing some of these systems. And yeah, that may initially seem like there may be a loss in rate revenue. And so how can a utility adapt to changing trends and find other sources of income besides volume rate? So hope that addressed some of it.
Yes, I had a question specifically about, you addressed a lot of campus-wide systems in which the treatment would possibly happen off-site in a remote building or a part of the campus. But if you're doing rainwater, stormwater in, let's say, an office building, and you're going to have to process that to Title 22 requirements, how do you deal with some of the more toxicity of like an ozone, UV in a basement of an office building?
That's a great question. So, we do work with in San Francisco with our Department of Building Inspection and our Department of Public Health, Environmental Health branch to make sure that given the different treatments that are installed, that there's sufficient, ventilation and number of air turns and things like that. So there are building codes that can make sure that those treatment systems are installed and can protect operators and other people in the building.
Well, thank you, panel, for wonderful, wonderful set of presentations. I'm very interested in the water conservation energy nexus. Is there any way we can equate what extra energy we have to use for water reuse, water recycling, as against the energy saved by the utilities? So we want to know if the extra energy you use to recycle this water can be equated to the energy saved by say, the utilities.
I'll address this very quickly, which is that there are energy savings through on-site systems, through the not having to convey wastewater back to a treatment plant or convey recycled water back from a centralized plant. So where you're farther away from a centralized facility, that energy savings is going to be greater. I like to look at what we call the energy intensity of water. And so the great part about non-potable reuse is that you don't have to treat to drinking water standards. You treat to the appropriate standard, or the fit for purpose reuse. So that helps to lower the energy intensity of that water along with conveyance. It's often difficult to do all of the math that needs to be done to prove that out, but it certainly in a specific situation can be less energy intensive water to have the on-site reuse. But I think our next panel is also going to talk about the energy water nexus, so we'll have a chance to get into that more.
Hi, thank you so much to everyone on the panel. So my question's a little bit kind of awkward, but I work for Toto Americas Holdings, and I work in the washlet division, so that's the kind of integrated bidet seat. And what I was curious about was about the kind of non-potable water. And in general, in Japan, the water that comes out of the toilet and the bidet feature is just as clean as what you would have in the shower. And I was curious if I love the idea of recycling water, and I firmly believe in conservation and all that. But I was curious if we were to go through with recycling water, and the water that goes through the toilet is not kind of on par with what we would expect in the shower, whether that would be hygienic for kind of, spraying our most sensitive parts.
I think there's a quick answer, which is that we typically put domestic water into the washlets, so it is potable water. But to flush the toilet would be non-potable. So it's two different supply lines. Or it can be. Let's put it that way.
Am I allowed to ask a question, Mark? Is that okay? Don, my question is for you. You mentioned earlier in your presentation that we are blessed here in the city and county of San Francisco to be able to have this one-stop shop. But in the jurisdictions that you work, what is your approach strategy when you have one entity saying, yes, we're all for this, but you have another entity that is resistant to permitting or resistant to, or just generally resistant? What is your approach strategy when you're talking to these multiple organizations?
I think in general we've seen everyone being very supportive of water reuse, and the questions have just been that some folks have had specific concerns or needs. I mentioned solids being discharged, and I think as all of those things that I mentioned have a solution, and if they're planned for up front, that it's usually not an issue. And I think the important thing is to really get in to understand the needs of the individual stakeholders, which many times are diverse. You might have one agency that just says, yeah, go at it, and the other one says, well, wait, you got to discharge that. You're discharging that to my sewer, and how's that going to impact me? But all those things have solutions and have been dealt with, and so I think the challenges that come up that I've seen have been just the newness of this. Most outside of San Francisco, and elsewhere in the state, this is very new and emerging, and it's growing, but people are walking through the door with these projects, and the agency hasn't seen it, they don't have the resources, and I think that's where SB 966 is going to go a long ways once that's fully implemented to providing a template that local agencies can adopt and have a process to permit these is more uniform, because that's what they're really struggling with outside of San Francisco now. Is everyone wants to do water reuse. I think no matter which political party you're on, where you're at, everyone understands that water is an issue, and so does that answer your question?
Mostly.
Okay.
I'm just curious actually about your own strategy. I mean, but we can talk offline. I know that there's more conversations happening.
Yeah, everything that's been brought up that has been, let's even just say a potential roadblock, has a solution for it, and especially if it's planned early enough, and then you're not caught flat-footed where you've already got your system installed and say, gee, if I knew about that, I could have done it differently. So that's why I encourage people to talk. Make sure you identify outside of San Francisco, where here we go to the PUC, and they say very well laid out, but there's there could be 6 different agencies, and they all have different concerns, and you've got to meet with them up front. If you do that, if you really follow through with that, I think you're going to have a successful project. But start early.
Okay. So, time for one last question.
There are many parties in this process, and I think we've talked about the developer and the contractor and the owner. I have a question about the city. Outside of San Francisco, there are smaller cities, and perhaps, and you just said everybody wants to reuse water, and the city council may want to encourage that. How does the city council do that? What kinds of movements or what kinds of actions can they take to encourage that, in light of the fact they'll be putting in a lot of multi-dwelling units now? And when I say multi-dwelling units, I don't mean 100, I mean like 15 or 20.
I'll attempt a quick answer, and then I might pass it off to our folks from the city. But I think that often infrastructure goes through a planning phase that's part of like a specific plan or an area plan. So there's an area of your city that you are thinking of developing or even changing zoning or changing in some way. There's a planning effort that goes on to identify sort of what that area will look like, and then sort of as a layer of that is the utility, the infrastructure plan. So what's the infrastructure capacity? So if you're planning around a specific area, and I'm not exactly sure how the city council operates in with city planning, but there's a planning process that usually called like a specific plan that would go through like an EIR process that would enable you to study infrastructure capacity. And so if you considered on-site reuse as part of your meeting your water infrastructure needs, needs and wastewater infrastructure needs, then you could embed that into the specific plan and the EIR study. So.
Great. Am I live? Okay. Yeah, there we are. Okay. Well, a big round of applause to our panelists for a fantastic presentation. Thank you all for coming. Packed full of information today. And just a last reminder, if anyone needs AIA credits, be sure to sign up. And the USGBC, I'm dropping everything now. USGBC number is on the screen. Thank you very much for coming.